Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Jawad Tehami. US President Donald Trump has urged Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to improve relations with Pakistan and fulfill his promise to better the lives of Kashmiri people. The two leaders met on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has said the world needs a strong United Nations with human rights as its touchstone. On the other side, the leader of the opposition in Indian Rajya Sabha, Ghulam Nabi Azad, has said the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir is very bad and the freedom of speech doesn't even exist there. He's on a 6-day tour after Indian Supreme Court allowed him a visit to the occupied valley. To talk about the latest regarding Kashmir, we've been joined by Mr. Sardar Ali, former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, joining us from Lahore. Mr. Lieutenant Naeem Khalid Lodhi, the defense analyst, joining us from Rawalpindi. And Mr. Yasir Ahmed, Director of South Asia Center for Peace and Human Rights, editor of the KashmirInsider.com, joining us from London. I'll start the discussion from you, Mr. Sardar. Asif, how do you see the statement by President Donald Trump to Prime Minister Narendra Modi that he has urged him to better relations with Pakistan and also make the lives of Kashmiris better?
I think out of all this session of the we are very clear that our Prime Minister went there to change the public opinion, to meet world leaders, and to brief them on the dangers that are inherent in the situation in South Asia with regard to Kashmir in the Pakistan. I think that was the purpose he went. Nobody in Pakistan expected that there will be any major move by the Security Council or the General Assembly or the Third Committee. I don't think voting was in the mind of either our Prime Minister or by the people of Pakistan. What was in our mind was that will Trump will he swing completely towards Modi or New Delhi, or will he place himself in a position whereby he can play a constructive role in South Asia and in Afghanistan? I think if this was our expectation, or this was my expectation at least, then I think we have succeeded. Prime Minister Imran Khan has done a fine job, and I think Donald Trump did not play on the turf of Modi. Only once he went to Houston, and my statement at that time was, Modi should have the courage to go to Srinagar and hold a public meeting there, not in Houston. Anyway, he did this show, and he thought this show will win him Donald Trump, and Donald Trump will be in his pocket. This did not happen. Donald Trump refused to play his game, except on Islamic terrorism in apostrophes as a unit. On that, every American president has been, saying this for a long time, since 9/11.
Mr. Sardar, I'll come back to you. Hold your thought over here, please. Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodhi, how do you see this particular move by President Donald Trump, that he has urged the Indian Prime Minister to normalize relations with Pakistan and also to bring a normalcy back into Indian-occupied Kashmir?
Thank you very much. I think we need to realize that diplomacy has its limits. It only operates within the global economic and political framework, and that is what we should be expecting. Are we not clear that in this region, the strategic partner of America is India, and they will not ask India, or they will not press India to do anything which Indians don't like. In fact, I am of the view that even this delay of Afghan talks or rupture of Afghan talks is also because of Indian demand, because they must have asked that please do something so that Pakistan cannot move forces from west to east. So I am highly suspicious of whatever Trump says. He doesn't mean that. And even it will be, I think, a great risk if we accept his arbitration or mediation. If at all we have to ask for mediation, it should be through a combination of countries like China, America, okay, maybe Turkey or Russia, or such like group of countries. Otherwise, we will be putting our stake at great risk. So I don't think. You see, he not only that he attended that meeting, the Modi welcome thing, he also said radical Islamic terrorism, we have to fight together. And Modi there, he said that time has come that now we must fight terrorism, terrorists as well as those who sponsor, this thing, which he was clearly indicating towards Pakistan.
Mr. Naeem, this is the fourth time President Donald Trump has made offer of mediation between Pakistan and India. What do you think? You have already mentioned that President Trump also participated in the Houston rally led by Mr. Modi. So what happened to be the limitation on part of the US president that he can't impress forcefully on India to come to the negotiating table or accept the offer of mediation?
The simple answer is because he doesn't want it. We can just imagine that the minimum thing he should have asked was to lift the curfew, pay attention to the human rights violations which are going. He didn't even mention that. And secondly, I can give you one proof which I would like anyone to challenge that. We are fighting, we are helping them to fight in Afghanistan for the last 17, 18 years. And just 3 days back, the Afghan government said that we do not accept this Durand line as international border. So if ally like Pakistan, which has had so much and are doing so much for them, if they cannot do even this much for us from Afghanistan, and even this much that the curfew should be lifted from Kashmir, what else do you expect? These are wrong expectations. I think
Mr. Naeem, I'll come back on this particular point, how Pakistan actually use its influence, particularly as far as the Afghan thing is concerned, and influence the United States to impress upon India to resolve the Kashmir dispute. Mr. Yasir, how do you think Prime Minister Modi has said India is not shying away from the talks? It is Pakistan which hasn't made many efforts to come into negotiations. Rather, this is very contrary to the facts that Pakistan had been consistently offering India to come to the negotiating table despite its provocative behavior on the line of control as well, before the revocation of Article 370 in the Kashmir territory.
It is evident that India will not be able to control the situation in Kashmir, what is happening, and things will get really very worse with the military presence that is in Kashmir. And I think Kashmiris, they would need diplomatic help, political help from Pakistan. But I think it is time that Kashmiris should take command of this struggle in their own hands. And because right now we don't find we have many friends around the world. As you know, there are countless United Nations Security Council resolutions, and still United Nations, they are staying away from implementing them. And things in Kashmir will get worse. This is the 51st day. What Modi is trying to do, he's just trying to deviate from what is happening in Kashmir. The kind of atrocities that the army are committing. They're trying to cripple down the economy of Kashmiris. They just want to, break Kashmiris. So that is what they want to do.
Okay, earlier, Indian Supreme Court had ordered the government to bring normalcy back in occupied Kashmir, and also allowed Ghulam Nabi Azad, the leader of the opposition in Indian Rajya Sabha, to visit the valley. He visited the valley, and what are his findings during his 6-day tour? Let's watch what he had to say.
सर, किस तरह के हालात हैं कश्मीर में? आप गए हैं, खुद आपने देखा है, क्या हालात में सुधार है? क्या आप बोलना चाहेंगे सर?
बहुत खराब। जितनी भी जगह मैं जाना चाहता था, उसका 10वां हिस्सा भी हमको जाने की इजाजत नहीं थी। स्टेट फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच का तो नामो निशान नहीं है इस स्टेट में।
Mr. Naeem, can you give us a glimpse what exactly the Indian Supreme Court might do after these findings of Ghulam Nabi Azad over there during his 4-day tour, in which he was not allowed even for to visit the area more than 10%?
I think it will have to be seen that how powerful is the Supreme Court, although we have an impression that they are quite independent. And earlier they have given such verdicts which were quite encouraging. But I don't know what sort of understanding between the executives and the judiciary we have in India. Because this is an executive decision, whatever has been done, whatever is going on, this clamping down, this curfew and all that. And I don't think Supreme Court can do more than just advising them that they should look after the humanitarian angle or whatever it is. And let me add one thing that, and I will just quote the Indian Army Chief, who said 2 days back that we have eliminated the young leadership of the freedom movement in Indian and Kashmir. So I believe that, and it was my assessment before that also. In my own humble assessment, the phase 1 of their operation is nearly over. 51 days are good enough actually to eliminate 400 to 500 youth of the first tier of leadership, the second tier of leadership, even if the third tier of leadership. Whether they have been martyred or they have been removed from that area, that will be seen once the curfew is lifted. So even if Supreme Court says anything or gives some order which has to be executed, I think it will not make much of difference, because whatever the Indian forces were mandated to do in these 51 days, they must have achieved that. And although I do agree with Yasin Saab that what he was saying that Yasir Saab, that you cannot suppress the people of Kashmir. There are so many numbers. Alternative leadership will come up, but this action of Indian Army would have put this freedom movement at least 3 to 5 years back in time. And that is what they wanted. And now the second phase is going to start, in which they are going to ask for a lot of investment from the friends, and they are going to bring their own investment also in...
And besides that, the provocative statements by the Army Chief also keep coming in. Thank you very much. Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodhi, the defense analyst, joining us from Rawalpindi. Mr. Yasir, the UN chief lamented over unresolved situations in Yemen, Libya and Afghanistan, a threatened two-state solution between Israel and Palestine, Venezuelan displacements and the alarming possibility of the armed conflict in the Gulf. Don't you think he should have added Kashmir to this list as well?
Well, as Kashmiris, we are waiting for United Nations Secretary General to intervene, and hopefully, I was just reading that within the next couple of days, he might mention Kashmir there as well. But I think, as we know, to us Kashmiris, United Nations right now is a defunct organization. When there are countless United Nations resolutions, why have they not been able to implement it? Why can't even they send a fact-finding mission to Kashmir to see the ground reality itself and expose, whatever narrative the Indians have created?
Okay, thank you very much. Yasir Ahmed, the director of the South Asian Center for the Peace and Human Rights and editor of the KashmirInsider.com, joining us from London, and Mr. Sardar Asif Ali, former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, joining us from Lahore. Here we take a short break, and after we return, we'll discuss European nations following suit in blaming Iran for attacks on Saudi oil installations. Stay with us, we'll be back in a bit. Welcome back to Newswire. US President Donald Trump has threatened Iran with more sanctions owing to what he termed as menacing behavior of Iran. French President, on the other hand, has urged the US and Iran to engage in dialogue. He has also hinted for some progress towards Iran during the United Nations General Assembly session. On the other hand, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has ruled out the possibility of talks until sanctions, which she said it is very unrealistic that these sanctions are lifted by Washington. On the other hand, Iran has ruled out the possibility of talks until the sanctions against it are lifted. Earlier, after the US and Saudi Arabia, the UK, France and Germany had blamed Iran for attacks on Saudi oil installations. The tensions in the Gulf escalated after these attacks, which were claimed by Yemen's Houthi rebels Iran has repeatedly denied the allegations. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has announced to present his Hormuz Peace Initiative, which he says is designed to include all the countries of the region and aims to expand cooperation beyond regional security. To talk more about this, we are joined by Mr. Meguerditchian, journalist and researcher in American presidential history based in Paris, and Mr. Abbas Aslani, analyst from Tehran. Thank you both of you for your time. So Mr. Van, how do you think President Trump has termed Iran as the #1 terrorist in the world? Do you think that has added fuel to fire in tensions which are already rising with Iran?
Well, not a lot of things changed from the side of the Americans. The Americans, President Trump gave a speech which was relatively similar to his previous speeches regarding Iran. He renewed his calls for the Iranian regime to de-escalate its activities in the region. He asked for them to get back to the negotiating table. Well, he even fired his own national security advisor, which the Iranians and some other pro-Iran governments around the world deemed an impediment to any future negotiations with Iran over a new nuclear deal. When he fired John Bolton, he took a step forward towards perhaps achieving a new détente between the two countries. The French President Macron even pushed this for an opportunity to have a meeting between the two sides during the UN General Assembly meetings. But we have to see what the Iranians will do today.
Well, exactly. We'll come back to this about the prospects of a meeting between President Hassan Rouhani and President Donald Trump. Mr. Abbas, France had earlier followed suit and blamed Iran for the attacks on Saudi oil installations, which was denied by Iran once again. Do you think France has limited its influence to convince Iran to come to the negotiations? Because already France was playing a vital role in making the two parties come to the negotiating table.
Well, it seems that the accusations against Iran were made from the very beginning without anything investigation. And the reasoning was that there was maybe no other relevant explanation to this. It seems that the three European countries, they want to use that position and statement as a leverage against Iran to bring Tehran into the negotiating table. As the American president demands for a meeting with Iranian leaders in New York. But the Iranian leaders, they have been saying that by the time that the Americans do not lift the sanctions, they will not sit at a negotiating table with the Americans. And the Europeans in between, they have been unable to convince both sides to come together. And that's why I think they are using that as a pressure against Iran. On the first hand, to bring it to the table with Americans, and on the second hand, they will try to impose the agenda they want on the negotiations. And I think another, achievement for Europeans in relation with this statement can be that they can convince Saudi Arabia in future that they supported the country, and they can, let's say, convince the country in order to buy more arms from those countries and in order to make more money. And I think that's why they have made the statement. But I'm not seeing the statement to make any pressure or making any impact on the Iranian position. And till so far, we have been seeing that the Iranian officials in New York, they have been insisting on first
lifting the sanctions. Mr. Abbas, I'll come back to you to discuss the statements which are coming from the Iranian leadership. Mr. Van, just like France, Germany has also blamed Iran for the attacks, but Angela Merkel also said that she wants the US and Iran to have a dialogue. Do you think these European nations can make a breakthrough for any sort of meeting between the two presidents at the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, the European leaders and the American leadership, Washington, pretty much are on the same page on how to deal with Iran at the moment. Both the Germans, the French, even the English yesterday, Prime Minister Boris Johnson mentioned that he has trust that the American President Donald Trump would be the only leader who can actually change something in this conflict, and actually perhaps meet with the President Rouhani and have a better nuclear deal that would address Iran's activities in the Middle East. So the German leadership, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and Donald Trump are on the same page on that. They were not on the same page over the JCPOA nuclear deal signed by the previous U.S. administration. Things have changed today. The JCPOA deal the Americans withdrew from, they want to renegotiate it. They want to sit down and talk. President Macron said, what we need to talk about is Iran's activities in the region. What we need to talk about is Iran's ballistic missile program. What we need to talk about is the future of the Middle East and the peace in the Middle East.
But there has been a clear, Mr. Van, there has been a clear statement by Iranian Foreign Minister Jawad Zarif. He said there couldn't be any negotiation regarding a new deal if the old or the current deal, which is intact between the European powers and Iran, is complied by all the partners alike.
Well, yeah, that's a kind of a pressure tool from the Iranian side because the Iranians are trying to criticize the European Union, the France and Germany and the UK for not being able to do enough to help the Iranian economy at the moment, which is suffering under sanctions. Look, a lot of Iranians I talk to come from different backgrounds. Some say we're not feeling anything from the sanctions. Some say the life is going on as usual. Business as usual. Others say we're depending on their economic status, to be honest. But what the Iranians want to tell the Europeans is, come on, do something, change something. But the Europeans, their hands are tied now because the Iranians are not helping in the Middle East. The attack on the Saudi oil facilities gave the Europeans a way to say, you see, now you have we can justify our inaction towards your economy, towards easing the sanctions, because you're not helping us in the Middle East.
Mr. Van, you just mentioned that all the European powers are on the same page with the US as Iran is concerned, and particularly when we talk about the Iranian nuclear deal. So, Iranian Foreign Minister spokesperson Abbas Mousavi has said that it is the bullying of the US and the European powers have actually succumbed to that particular bullying. Do you agree with this statement?
Well, if you can call it bullying, you can also call it that there's a much stronger alliance that binds together the United States and the European Union. There is a much stronger and older historic alliance that binds together US and UK foreign policy. The UK took a couple of times they took a stance to say that we are with the JCPOA deal, but the UK historically they would tend to follow the American line on foreign policy, especially in the Middle East, in the past couple of decades now already. The French are also in a similar way, but they would like to play a good role. They would like to play a positive role to perhaps bring President Rouhani and Trump together during this meeting in New York.
On the negotiating table. How do you see that President Trump, despite threatening during his address to the United Nations General Assembly of the more sanctions on Iran, has also said that they are also here and we are also here? Do you think he is somewhat interested to talk to President Rouhani and will show some flexibility? Is there any chance if France, Germany, as you have already mentioned, they are already on a same page, but French president has been heard saying that progress on Iran would be there in coming hours. So do you think there is a tint of, or there is a chance of flexibility that might be shown by President Trump?
Of course there is, and the Iranians, if they are smart, if they are willing to think about the long-term consequences of these sanctions on the Iranian people, on the Iranian economy, they would take this meeting today in New York City. If the Iranians want a deal, they will meet President Trump today, who is back at home. He is being attacked by his own opponents for domestic political problems in the United States. So it's a perfect opportunity for President Rouhani to show his goodwill, as well as for President Trump today, that will turn the cameras away and focus on the two presidents having a historic meeting in New York City. that
it's a
hasn't
good
taken
opportunity for
place.
President Rouhani to show his willingness to enter into negotiations with President Trump. Mr. Abbas, President Rouhani has already announced to present his Hormuz Peace Initiative. As Mr. Van has also said, that it is a good opportunity for President Rouhani to show that he is willing to enter into the negotiations. What we can expect out of that peace initiative President Rouhani is about to present at his United Nations General Assembly address?
Well, I think the opportunity is not just for Mr. Rouhani, it's also for Trump in order to show good faith, and because they withdrew from the nuclear deal and they were who left the negotiating table, and if they want to resume the talks, they have to return to that framework, and Iran is willing in the condition that they return to the negotiating table. But on the case of the initiative, which is expected to be announced by Iranian president later today, I can say that he is, what Iran argues that if you want to have stability and security in the region, so let's start it. Because there is a framework based on the paragraph 8 of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 598 that demands the Secretary General of the United Nations in order to consider the measures in consultation with Iran, Iraq, and other countries in the region in order to bring stability and security to this part of the world. So Iran wants to show readiness and willingness to, let's say, pave the way for more stability in the region. This is happening while the Americans have proposed a different, let's say, suggestion and offer. There is a difference between these two offers. Iranian plan is based on the, let's say, bringing the regional players into the game, and they by themselves bring the stability.
It is likely to focus on bringing the regional players into cooperation for the regional security and the security of the oil routes in the Strait of Hormuz. Here we take a short break, and before we go on the break, I would like to thank you, Mr. Van Meguerditchian, journalist and researcher in American presidential history based in Paris, and Mr. Abbas Aslani, analyst, joining us from Tehran. Here we take a short break. After we return, we'll discuss the future of Brexit after the UK Supreme Court declared Parliament suspension as null and void. See you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to Newswire. The United Kingdom Supreme Court passed a unanimous judgment of all 11 justices, declaring Prime Minister Boris Johnson's suspension of the Parliament unlawful. Boris Johnson had suspended the Parliament for 5 weeks earlier this month, arguing it was necessary in order to hold the Queen's speech and set out a new legislative programme. The PM has promised the UK will leave on 31st of October with or without a deal with the EU, but the Parliament passed a law intended to force a delay instead of allowing a no-deal exit. To understand this and its impact on the wider Brexit process, we are joined by Mr. Henry Bolton, politician, joining London, and Mr. Alex D. Ruyter, Director, Centre for Brexit Studies, Birmingham City University from Birmingham. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. First of all, Mr. Bolton, would you like to please shed some light on the Supreme Court's ruling? Why has it declared suspension of the Parliament as unlawful?
Well, we should make clear that it's not because the Prime Minister has actually broken an Act of Parliament. What this is about is that the court has decided that there was no good reason for the proroguing of Parliament to take place, and therefore it should not have taken place. That is, in essence, the problem here. The decision, as you say, was unanimous. It won't be questioned. I think I'm not a lawyer, but I think the only place that the Prime Minister could take it to question it would be the European courts, but that won't happen. I think now we will see an interesting game playing out in Parliament, where the Prime Minister tries to tough it out and still lead us to a 31st of October departure from the European Union, whilst Parliament is doing everything it can to ensure that there is a delay, as you said earlier in your introduction.
Okay, Mr. Bolton, but Prime Minister Boris Johnson has shown his profound disagreement to this one. It is also said this is a very much part of the Constitution, and it has been happening in the past as well.
I agree with the Prime Minister. I think that this is more of a political decision than a legal decision. Of course, the fact that the Supreme Court has made this decision, made this judgment, it implies that it is legal. But even in their findings, the court has said that they do not see that there is a sufficient reason for the proroguing of Parliament. Now, that is a political judgment. That is not a legal judgment, in my view. I'm sure there will be people who rake over all these coals in the weeks and months
So you think
to come,
it's more of a political judgment rather than a legal judgment? I'll move to Mr. Alex. Do you think it's a political? Do you agree with Mr. Bolton? Is it a political judgment or is it based on the spirit of law?
Well, look, I'm not a lawyer here, but I think, what is apparent for all to see is that the Supreme Court made this decision in terms of the fact that the UK is a parliamentary democracy and regards Parliament as sovereign. That dates back to the Bill of Rights circa 1688. And in that decision, one of the two key things that it pointed out were that the executive in the form of the government should A, be subject to scrutiny by Parliament, and B, be accountable by Parliament. And the Supreme Court judges also wish to point out that this was not about Brexit. They have no particular stance on Brexit for this, but they do regard this as a significant constitutional change, the most significant clearly since joining what was then the Common Market in 1973. Now, I can only interpret this as a legal decision.
Okay, you're of the opinion that this is more of a legal decision. Already, Mr. Bolton has pointed there could be some interesting happenings after the Parliament resumes. So what happens after the Parliament resume and the MPs return to the Parliament?
Well, the MPs, of course, Jeremy Corbyn has had conversations with leaders of the other opposing parties to try and look at how they can get Boris Johnson to abide by the mandate of Parliament to get him to seek an extension to Article 50 membership to the end of January if we don't have a revised withdrawal agreement on the table in Parliament by October the 19th. He said he has said that he refuses to countenance staying in the EU beyond October 31st. Fine. Well, if he chooses not to abide by the will of Parliament in that regard, then he would be breaking the law. So I don't think he would want to do that. Where then does that leave him? Well, he can either resign, he could try and go to Buckingham Palace and try and approach the Queen to get Jeremy Corbyn to try and form a government in the hope that that would fail and thereby bring about the early election he seeks. Or maybe he'll do a bit of a volte-face. Maybe he'll turn around and present a revised withdrawal agreement to Parliament which would only provide for a Northern Ireland-only backstop. That is, to only have those provisions apply to Northern Ireland when the UK is due to exit the EU. He might well do that, given that he no longer has the DUP to rely on to effect a majority in Parliament. With their support, he doesn't have a majority anymore. He might well turn around and do that in the expectation that he might get enough Labour MPs to vote alongside the government, those Labour MPs who are in heavily Leave voting seats who've made noises along those lines. The big question then, of course, is how would his own so-called European research group of MPs, those Tory hard Brexiteers such as Jacob Rees-Mogg, Steve Baker, Mark Francois, how would they vote in that regard? Would they regard any kind of withdrawal agreement as a betrayal of Brexit? I don't know. Past behaviour suggests that they might, but we'll see.
Okay, Mr. Alex will come back to this particular point, discuss the wider prospects of the Brexit process after this Supreme Court judgment. Mr. Bolton, what are the chances of the resignation of Prime Minister Boris Johnson? Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has demanded an apology and resignation from the Prime Minister and has also hinted at tabling a motion of no confidence.
I think it's very unlikely that Boris Johnson will resign. I would be highly surprised if he were to do that. It's normal in such circumstances that leaders of the opposition will put all the pressure that they can on the sitting government, and that's exactly what Jeremy Corbyn is doing. The other person who has called for Boris Johnson to resign is Nigel Farage, the leader of the Brexit Party, of course. And he's doing exactly the same thing. What you're seeing in this is not an expectation that indeed the Prime Minister will resign, but they are keeping the rhetoric and the pressure on the government, on Boris Johnson, because they want to achieve things that are not necessarily exactly the same as he does, or in different ways. So I think you can see more of this playing out in the coming days in Parliament, as there are some questions that are going to be asked of the Prime Minister today, some urgent questions, which are deliberately designed to be uncomfortable for him. They don't all relate to Brexit, and what you are seeing, I think, is all of the other political parties sensing quite rightly, some weakness in the Prime Minister and the government, and keeping the pressure on. Because
Mr. Alex, you see a lot of problems coming up for the Prime Minister. And what about a no confidence vote? There is no chance of resignation from the Prime Minister himself. So is there any likelihood of a no confidence vote?
Well, I think given the additional sitting days that this has entailed and so on, I think the odds of a no confidence vote would increase if the Prime Minister persists in holding out against requesting an extension of EU membership should he fail to get a revised withdrawal agreement through Parliament. I do think the odds of that have certainly gone up. I think such is the abysmal level of trust in the Prime Minister's stated intentions. I think anything short of an unequivocal abiding by Parliament's wishes on his behalf could well see that happening. If that then is upheld, we would then enter the territory of Jeremy Corbyn in effect getting 2 weeks to try and form a government. If that didn't work, we would then have the scenario of an election. But what are the chances of such a motion happening at the moment? I'm not sure we're likely to see that this side of him trying to get a revised withdrawal agreement, for the simple reason that so-called rebel Tories, the Amber Rudds, the Philip Hammonds, I don't think they would support that motion at the moment. And Rudd, of course, made a very interesting tweet shortly after the Supreme Court announcement, where she stated that she hoped Boris Johnson would work with Parliament to try and secure a withdrawal agreement. So I don't think we've entered that territory yet. I don't think we enter that territory realistically until next month after the European Council meeting, where he's had his deadline to try and come up with a revised proposal. So I think certainly for the small c Conservative members of Parliament, they will want to give them a chance to try and own an effective withdrawal agreement first. That would be my educated guess.
Okay, it is going to be the opposition going to push him for a delay that he has to get from the European Union. What are the chances of an early election, Mr. Bolton?
I think what are we talking about in terms of early? Before the 31st of October, I think that's very, very unlikely. But I'd also point out that in polling here in the UK, the Conservative Party is still a fair way ahead. The Labour Party is doing quite badly. So this is not the time for Jeremy Corbyn to try and push for a general election, or even bring about the circumstances where it becomes inevitable. So I think that's what we're seeing, a bit of an impasse and a standoff in politics at the moment. We've got people pulling in different directions. We've got the Liberal Democrats who want to, in terms of Brexit, they want to revoke Article 50 and not leave the European Union at all, ideally. Then you've got the Labour Party, who are some sort of they've cobbled some policy together which puts them rather in the middle, a foot in both camps, if you like, and the Conservative Party, whose leadership want to leave. Now, but none have the weight in Parliament or the weight in the country at the moment to decisively bring about a conclusion to that situation. And I think that is what you're going to see play out in the coming weeks. You're going to see these three elements fight it out, and ultimately we don't know how that's going to play out. We don't know what the conclusion is going to be. Boris Johnson has made it very clear that he is absolutely determined that we leave on the 31st of October, and it may indeed be the situation that either here in the UK, this unresolvable situation in Parliament continues to play out, and by default, on the 31st of October, we fall out of the European Union, partly because the European Union will see no light at the end of the tunnel, and they themselves, even if the Prime Minister does comply with the wishes of Parliament at the moment and goes to Brussels and asks for an extension, there is no guarantee whatsoever that the European Union, seeing this mess, will think that granting an extension will help to resolve the situation at all.
So you've just mentioned there is no guarantee how the European Union is going to react onto this proposal by the British Prime Minister. But he has said he's trying to negotiate a new deal with the EU. If that happens in case and MPs back it before 31st of October, so there would be no need for an extension. Can you shed some light on this scenario?
Yes, I mean, essentially, the only deal that is in place as an offer at the moment is Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. Now, there are all sorts of issues about that, all sorts of discussions around that, but that is the only thing that's on the table. It can be adjusted, and this is what the negotiations seem to be around at the moment. Whether or not that can be adapted in some way to be made acceptable, particularly around the contentious issue of what's called the backstop, which is about the land border between Northern Ireland, which would be in the UK, and the European Union, i.e. the Republic of Ireland in the south of the island. So that's the area that is being explored in those negotiations. And quite honestly, I think it would be foolish for anybody to predict with any certainty how that's going to come out. The European Union seem to be keen to have an agreement, so there might be some movement there, but they have legal and political responsibilities to ensure that the European Union or the integrity of the European Union is maintained and the single market. So that means that restricts their flexibility. On the UK side, again, Boris Johnson and the politics of the situation mean that there's only a certain degree of flexibility here. There is a window of opportunity, and time will tell, and these negotiations will
tell whether these negotiations bear some fruit. Thank you very much for your time, both of you gentlemen. Mr. Henry Bolton, the politician, joining us from London, and Mr. Alex de Ruyter, Director, Centre for Brexit Studies, Birmingham University, joining us from Birmingham. Thank you for your time, both of you gentlemen. That's all from Newswire today. We will see you soon with in-depth analysis from around the world. Till then, it's goodbye.